Hello and welcome to a supplementary episode of the Baldur's Gate series. In this episode we're going to be reading all the books that we found in this house, because there were far too many to read in a normal episode. So, let's get started, shall we? So what books did we pick up? Well, we picked up a bit of the history of the North, which we have read some of before, the entirety of the history of Calimshan, and then I believe, well, there's another history of the North, but there's a lot of history of Shadowdale. Like, a ton of it. In fact, pretty much the entire history of Shadowdale is here. Okay. So, what I think we might do is we might read the histories of the North and the other histories that we got, and then we'll go into Shadowdale afterwards. So if I just organise this slightly, so we have history of the North. That's North 7, North 6. That's North 4. Okay. And then that's all the history of the North we got. Let's do those first. The first history of the North. History of the North, the First Flowering. For millennia, gold elves dwelt in Elifarn, where the Waterdeep now stands, and Irulan, along the River Shining. From their ornate forest cities, they traded with emerging human nations like Netheril and Elusk, and repulsed the attacks of the goblin races. Meanwhile, dwarven clans united as the nation of Delzun, named for the dwarf who forged the Union. United as the nation of Delzun, named for the dwarf who forged the Union. The nation, existing primarily underground, extended from the Ice Mountains to the Nether Mountains. Silver Moon Pass was its western border, and the Narrow Sea its eastern shore. Orcs came from the north of the Spine of the World, but returned back in great slaughter by the elves. To this day, this is the homeland and stronghold for the orcs and similar races. So orcs come from very, very north. And in the north is where the elves lived, pretty much. Okay, cool. Well, that was nice, short, to the point. Number 4, the Elven Exodus. This era left behind elven strongholds ripe for pillaging by humans and orcs. When the elves choose to leave the north and travel to Evermeet, their works quickly disappeared, leaving only places like the Old Road and a ruined port in the High Forest to mark Elan's passing. Yet, it was not only the elves who would disappear from their long-held homes. The human nation of Netheril also stood on the brink of history. Doom for Netheril came in the form of a desert, devouring the narrow sea and spreading to fill its banks with dry dust and blowing sand. Legend states that when the great wizards of Netheril realized their land was lost, they abandoned it and their countrymen, fleeing to all corners of the world and taking the secrets of wizardry with them. More likely, this was a slow migration that began 3,000 years ago and reached its conclusion 1,500 years later. Whatever the truth, wizards no longer dwelled in Netheril. To the north, the once majestic dwarven stronghold of Delzuen fell upon hard days. Then the orcs struck. Orcs have always been foes in the north, surging out of their holes every few tens of generations when their normal haunts can no longer support their burgeoning numbers. This time they charged out of their caverns in the Spine of the World, poured out of abandoned mines in the Grey Peaks, screamed out of lost dwarf holds in the Ice Mountains, raged forth from the crypt complexes in the Nether Mountains, and stormed upwards from the bowels of the High Moon Mountains. Never before or since has there been such an outpouring of orcs. Delzun crumbled before this onslaught and was driven in on itself. Netheril, without its wizards, was wiped from the face of history. The Irulan elves alone withstood the onslaught, and, with the aid of the treants of Torlang and other unnamed allies, were able to stave off the final days of their land for yet a few centuries more. In the east, Irulan built the fortress of Askelhorn and turned it over to the refugees from Netheril as Netherese followers built the town of Kers in the High Forest. The fleeing Netherese founded Lork and Loudwater. Others wandered the mountains, hills, and moors north and west of the High Forest, becoming ancestors of the Uthgart and founders of Silvery Moon, Everlund, and Sundabar. Okay, so orcs came and attacked, killed pretty much everybody but the elves. And then, yeah, and then the elves withstood it, and then there were some refugees from Netherell. Cool. And then we have History of the North 7. 1368, Year of the Banner. As the dwarfs settled in for the winter in the reclaimed city of Felbar, a group of Zentarim-sponsored adventurers broke into Great Worm Cavern, slaying Ilrem the Wise, shaman leader of the Great Worm tribe. As the tribe's warriors descended into the ranks of the evil adventurers, teleportation magic spirited at least 3 of those responsible, as well as a vast amount of treasure stolen from Ilrem to safety. According to Themren, the tribe's present shaman, Ilrem, promised to watch over the tribe in spirit now that my mortal form is destroyed. Despite the reassuring words of Ilrem, the tribe suffered through an oppressive winter that included heavy snow, scarce game, and low morale. Trusted visitors to the barbarian encampment report that Themren and Gwishen Ironhand Telistars are wearing some form of armor made from the scales of Elrem. This use of their former shaman's body as protection was supposedly ordained through a dream vision. The armor appears as little more than a supple leather armor, but seems to deflect blows and protect as well as full plate armor. Nesme reported a drastic rise in the number of troll attacks in the Evermoors, and various sources confirm that something is driving the trolls out of the moors. Whatever is behind the trolls' exodus is destined to remain a mystery for the remainder of the year, as adventuring parties expand themselves against the never-ending supply of trolls that are fleeing the bog. In the most surprising move of the year, the Blue Bear tribe, led by the shaman chieftain Tanta Hagara, marched on the fiend-ridden fortress of Hellgate Keep. While a brief struggle for political control of the city was reported by various sources, Tanta Hagara emerged as the new ruler of the city. Okay, so there's a lot more talk about shamans here, and no talk about elves whatsoever, right? Yeah, a lot about dwarven shamans, no talk about elves in this History of the North. So somewhere between here and here, elves stopped being a major factor. At least in that year. Maybe I'm wrong. But that's what I'm reading from that. I'm just checking. Are these all History of Shadowdale? They are all History of Shadowdale. Cool. So we've got the history of Calimshan, and then the histories of Shadowdale. I think. Yeah. Cool. So Calimshan, we know nothing about right now. So, history of Calimshan. Calimshan is older than either of the other empires of the Sands. First settled over 7,000 years ago by the Degen, a humanoid race from the elemental plane of air. These Degen were known to be very magical, and during the course of their rule, they developed many new spells previously not available in the plane of air. The Degen prospered for over 1,000 years in Calimshan, but their reign was ended by an invasion of creatures and minions from the plane of fire. Some say this is where the bitter hatred between the Jinn and the Ifrit started, though others contend this was just a result of a hatred that was already there. Whatever the cause, the battle was long and bloody, and took over 100 years to complete. The Jinn finally routed the attackers, but were greatly weakened in the attempt. They slowly declined, and the last mention of the Jinn is just under 6,000 years ago. For the next 4,000 years, Calimshan was dominated by nomadic tribes of humans, tribes from various places. Chult, the Shar, the Shining Plains, Chondath, even Am, and Cormyr took turns dominating, only to be conquered by the next, nearly identical tribe. Slowly, the nomadic nature of Calimshan began to change, as explorers and traders from Am and Waterdeep and Cormyr discovered the wonders of the area. Some tribes began to settle down and develop new means of support, like fishing, farming, or trading. These communities began to band together for mutual protection, and soon a civilization was born. it was only 1,300 years ago that the Shun Empire, now called Iltz-Khazar, came into being. The Shuns were a grand and glorious empire, and their excesses were the foundation of Kalashite snobbery today. They grew wise and powerful in the ways of magic, and ships and caravans bearing the Shun flag travelled across the realms. Shun himself, a particularly powerful mage, created a book of great power during this time called the Tome of the Unicorn. The exact location of the tome has been lost in time, but since the book is 2x3 and made of pure metal, it is likely to still be around. Somewhere. I like that. That pretty much hints you're gonna find it at some point. Maybe. Anyway. 900 years ago, the Shun Empire abruptly vanished. A great magical upheaval was suspected at first, but learned mages of other lands disputed the claim. A force that great, they say, would have disturbed magical powers and beings throughout the realms, and that didn't happen. Sages who have studied the Shun at great length have reached no definitive conclusions, but the most popular theories today center around a plague or disease that decimated the population. Today, the Shun impact on Calimshan is still great. The grandeur of that empire is responsible, more than anything else, for the strong national character of Calimshan today. The ruins of the Shum's greatest city, Montrativi Teshi Mir, can still be found in the wilderness to the west of the edge of the Forest of Mir. See below for more on the Monterevi Teshi Mir. Since the fall of Shum, no force or people has risen to solely dominate the land. There are half a dozen or so major cities, each of which exerts its power over its own area. About 170 years ago, a man in Kalimport amassed a large army and declared himself Pasha over the land. Before that army could march, however, the representatives of each major city met and agreed to recognize the Pasha's authority in limited areas and to pay a small tribute to him, enough to pay for the works the Pasha was expected to do. The oldest son of each Pasha inherits the title. If there is no son, the mayors of each large city select a new one. The current Pasha, Rashid Djenispul, has ruled for over 18 years and is the grandson of the Pasha elected by the mayors of Calimshan 44 years ago. Okay, interesting. I wonder how much this is relevant. The only bit I see being probably relevant is this Tome of the Unicorn, which was created by Shum, a powerful mage, but I don't know how relevant that's immediately going to be to us or whether it's relevant at all. Maybe it's hinting at something else. Another piece of media or something. Anyway. Let's learn about Shadowdale. Because there's a lot about Shadowdale. History of Shadowdale. The fall of Asmer, last Drow Marshal of the Twisted Tower. The Drow rule of Shadowdale lasted until the early 900s Dale Reckoning, when the increased human population in the area brought the Dark Elves into conflict with their now more numerous neighbours. The humans were the Dalesmen, who a millennia earlier had crossed the Dragon Reach and made peace with the elves of Myth Dranor, settling at the borders of the Great Woods that was the elven home. The Drow soon found themselves under continual attack, and most of those who held overground settlements retreated back below. The last powerful Drow leader was Asmer, the Marshal of the Twisted Tower, in its last Drow-held days. Asmer oversaw the last retreat of the Drow holdings in the face of a human uprising, and held the citadel against a year-long siege. With supplies and slaves brought up from the Underdark directly into the tower, the Drow could have conceivably held out forever. However, a human slave, family histories in the Dales indicate a number of possible individuals, poisoned the well in the tower, and the citadel was easily overrun. Asmer's body was not found among the dead, leading some to believe that he escaped back into the depths to rejoin his people. Noting the fact that he would have to explain to his matriarch how he lost Shadowdale, it is much more likely that, should Asmir have survived, he went into voluntary exile, hiding from both human and drow. Given that this occurred only 400 years ago, it is certainly possible that Asmir still lives. Okay, interesting. So we may encounter this Asmir. Well, I don't know. There's another 6 histories, I suppose. But also, what I'm wondering is whether a lot of these, like, oh, it was a human slave who poisoned the well, or, it was some individual who did this. What I'm wondering is whether some of these are like adventure paths or something. I don't know what they're called in D&D. Like campaigns or something, or what they would have been called at the time. And like whether these are basically just retellings of the normal path through, or like the major events that should happen. I don't know. It could just be random lore that was created. Anyway, History of Shadowdale 2. Ashaba becomes first lord of Shadowdale. Upon taking the Twisted Tower and removing the drowish yoke from the people, the Dalesmen had fully established the Dale of Shadowdale, with its seat of power in the tower itself. His first lord was a water wizard who had aided in the final attack, Ashaba, who was great in age when he ascended and ruled peacefully for 40 years thereafter. It is said that Ashaba realized he was dying and turned himself to water merging with the river. Since that time, the river, the ford, and the Twisted Tower all bear his name. Before passing on, Ashaba chose one of his trusted lieutenants as the new Lord of Shadowdale. Presented to the people of the Dale, he was made the new Lord by acclamation. In an additional honour, the pendant worn by Ashaba was thereafter recognised as a symbol of lordship in the Dalelands, and was possessed by each of the successive lords following. Okay, cool. So there's some kind of pendant we could try and get. I don't know. That's all I'm looking at these for right now. I'm like, what's immediately relevant? Okay, well there's this pendant. We could get that maybe. I don't know. There's nothing else relevant here apart from if we hear the name Ashaba, we know who it is. But yeah, and we know how the next person in charge of Shadowdale was chosen, at least for a while. It was chosen by whoever has the pendant. Who knows? Anyway, History of Shadowdale 3. Jodath and the Tourist Massacre. Past 100 years have been an example of the best and worst of the Lords of Shadowdale. All have been non-native to the Dalelands, though all made the land their home. A century ago, the Lord of the Dales was one Jodath, a stiff-necked agnostic who denied the power of any god, good or evil, and used force to back up his beliefs. During this time, there was a great deal of religious persecution, including a massacre of tourists on Watcher's Knoll. Jodath was eventually killed by a beast of the nether plane summoned by parties unknown, which then proceeded to rampage through the Dale. The beast was killed, and Shadowdale rescued by the spellcasters Umri and Sailoon. Umri was proclaimed Lord by acclamation. Okay, well I suppose the implication here when it says by parties unknown is that, some god unleashed this beast, maybe? Okay. Alright. History of Shadowdale 4. They're getting shorter. Umri rules in peace. The longest period of peaceful rule was by Lord Umri and his wife Sailoon, better known as the Witch of Shadowdale. They ruled over the community for 40 years, a period of extended peace with their neighbouring Dales, nations, and the Elven peoples. It was this very peace and power which made the Dale the target for attacks and sabotage by the Black Network, Zentarim. They sought and still seek to control the trade from the Moonsea to the Sword Coast, and desired to make Shadowdale a vassal state of Zentail Keep. Lord Umri's rule ended tragically when he was assassinated by Tish agents. Okay, so that was number 4. Number 5. History of Shadowdale, Jordan the False Lord. Lord Umri was assassinated by Zentarim agents, who in turn were captured and killed by the warrior Jordam. So, wait, basically the way you become in charge of this place is you kill the people who killed the person who used to rule? It's kind of odd. Anyway, Jordan, with the pendant of Ashaba in hand, the symbol of the lordship of the Dales, proceeded to present himself as the new lord, and was so acclaimed by the people. It was unknown to the people that Jordan was also an agent of the Zentarim, and that the entire proceeding had actually been a ruse. Jordan abandoned the Twisted Tower, instead establishing himself in Castle Crag, east of Shadowdale. His court was soon overrun with agents of the Black Network. When the people eventually revolted, Zentil Keep sent peace-keeping forces to maintain Jordan's rule. Sailun, Lord Umri's widow, now aware of the deception, but a firm pacifist, did her best to keep the Dale healthy and intact during Jordan's evil rule. Number 6. Kelben kills Jordan. Lord Jordan's rule of Shadowdale ended when he encountered Kelbem Arunsun, also called the Blackstaff. The story at the time was that Jordan accepted an invitation from Kelbem to visit Waterdeep, and there he took ill and died. In reality, Jordan ambushed Kelbem as the mage was leaving Shadowdale, and the Blackstaff killed him. In either case, Kelben took hold of the pendant of Ashaba, the symbol of the lordship in the Dales, and returned to Waterdeep with it, promising to send a suitable candidate for lordship to the Dales. Jordan had ruled for 5 years, and without his advocacy, Castle Crag was abandoned and the Zentil Keep troops routed. Jordan's previously chosen successor was a Milvontan named Lyron, but without the pendant, this individual was considered a pretender to the throne. And the final history of Shadowdale. Lords accepted by acclamation. This acclamation of the people has formed the basis for choosing the Lords of Shadowdale since the routing of the evil Lord Jordan by Kelben Blackstaff. Usually, a predecessor will step down as opposed to dying in office, and his chosen successor will be approved by the populace at large. This system has its drawbacks, as will be shown below, but in general, it has served the independent, self-willed people of the Dale very well. They've avoided the genetic lottery of which good bureaucracies and bad kinships are made, a quote from the venerable Elminster. The symbol of this lordship is the pendant of Ashaba, a device owned by the original wizard and used to determine the rightful lord of the Dale. Oh, okay. And that's the end of the history of Shadowdale. I was expecting that there would be some kind of great revelation at the end of that, but that's pretty much it there. Well, we have now read all the books. I think that's all the books we had to read. We have a few more here as well. We have the ones that we've already read, the history of the Chosen of Mystra and of the Fateful Coin. I'm thinking what we might do is we might just sell the books, because we have a very limited inventory space, but maybe if I sell them to the same person, we can get them back later. Yeah, maybe. Anyway, I'm going to end this little side episode here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.